be going over the SAT and the ACT, both of which are standardized tests that you should expect to take when applying for colleges. So to start it off, my name is Danielle. I am currently one of the interns at Education USA for the summer from the University of Chicago. And I'm really excited to, walk through the SAT and the ACT with you guys today. This is the very first session, mind you. So generally, we should expect a very general introduction to the standardized testing, but also every week we'll be expanding on different sections of the SAT and preparing you for when you have to take it. So welcome, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you all once again, and we'll just get right into it.
Thank you.
Of course. So unfortunately, polling does not work for me, but generally, I will actually ask if Yandi is able to use the polling function.
Yes, I can launch the poll. Just a sec.
Okay, thank you. I give this a moment. Me personally, I have taken only the ACT. In the United States, some of the states require you to take the ACT as opposed to the SAT. But generally, across the board, most people will take the SAT as opposed to the ACT. I actually prefer the structure of the SAT as well, but some states do require the ACT for data reasons. So you guys should be receiving a poll.
Okay, so this first poll was about where are they joining us from? And I see some responses from Central America, North America, and other. Let me go ahead and share the poll about SAT and ACT, just a sec. Okay, and I have launched the poll about have you ever taken the SAT or ACT? Most of them are saying no. There's only one person who has taken the SAT. And let me go ahead, just a couple of more seconds. I think we're only missing one person. And now, are you guys able to see the results? So yeah, most of you have not taken SAT nor ACT. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yandi. So this will be great because you guys will get to learn a little bit more about the structure of both exams, and you guys will find out which one is best for you. With the exception of the one person who has taken it already, you're already on the great track. So we're going to start with the SAT. Now, what is the SAT? The SAT is an entrance exam used by most colleges and universities to make admissions decisions. Generally, the higher the score, the more competitive you are for, more competitive universities. Additionally, the SAT structure is a multiple choice pencil and paper test created and administered by the College Board, which is a non-for-profit American organization that specializes in not just the SAT, but AP classes. We'll get to that in a second. Additionally, the SAT is, as stated by the College Board, is intended to measure a high school student's readiness for college and provide colleges with one common data point. So this is the standardization we were talking about that can be used to compare applicants. So generally, the higher score you get, the more competitive you are against other applicants, the more you can apply to more competitive colleges. Generally, a high exam score correlates to better odds. So the SAT also takes about 3 hours and will consist of 3 tests, which is the reading test, the writing and language test, and the math test. So the ACT, in comparison, the SAT provides about 43% more time per question. This is because the SAT is also a science section. Meanwhile, the SAT simply just combines that with the reading test. You should generally expect some science related passages in the reading test, but we'll get more into that in the future. This is just a rundown of the SAT. Additionally, the SAT stands for the Scholastic Assessment Test. So we're going to move on. So here's a cute little chart, just so you can have an idea of, how much time you should generally expect to allot between questions and sections. So we have about 65 minutes for the reading section, with a total of 52. Reading, language and writing has 35 with 44 questions, and math has about 80 minutes with 58 questions. Now, the math section, I should note, is divided between calculator and not calculator. So, some problems you will be able to use a calculator. Others, when on the non-calculator section, you'll have to, these are typically going to be word problems or general common knowledge questions. Meanwhile, you'll be expected to do more complex equations with the calculator section. In total, you have 180 minutes for 154 questions. Now, if you divide that, your odds are pretty good, estimating, you take appropriate amount of breaks in between, and you pace yourself pretty well. And that's just generally what to expect timing-wise. So let's say you want to learn more about the SAT. So generally, I imagine most of you are international students, so fees will be different, which is why I took the liberty of, if you want to find out more information for yourself, the College Board website, collegeboard.org, feel free to screenshot, has a lot more information on the SAT, especially if you're an international student. They have more in-depth breakdowns of, pricing, times to register, and whatnot. So this sometimes is a little different than with domestic students in the US, but in general, you should expect the registration fee to be about $60. And if you want to cancel, it should be about $30. Additionally, depending on where you're taking the exam, if you're in Mexico, if you're in Central America, South America, I checked the regional fee. On top of that registration fee is the $43. These are US dollars. Also, I saw that some testing centers charge extra. Now, I didn't have to pay extra for my testing center, but just something to expect, especially if you're abroad. Some testing centers will expect you to charge extra. And there is an essay portion, but you do not have to do the essay portion. Most colleges will only look at the main section, and if you do well in the essay, great, but it's no way going to make or break your application. So I encourage you not to pay extra for the essay portion, in my professional opinion. So here's also the dates for registration. This is taking into context international students. So if you want to screenshot this, go right ahead. With COVID, I should also note that the College Board had to adjust their structure to accommodate, digital learning. So I believe that is an option as well. But most people are more, let's say they're better at taking it in person rather than online. So I think that's some factor you can consider. Feel free to take a screenshot if you need. And yeah, we're going to move on to the ACT, which is what I took. So the ACT, or American College Testing, is a standardized test as well, used for college admissions in the US. So it's administered by the ACT, basically the nonprofit organization of the same name. And the ACT, as you'll notice, has more focus on science as opposed to the SAT. We have the English section, the mathematics section, reading, and scientific reasoning. But if you're not good at science, don't worry, because the science section is heavily reading based as well. You'll be asked to look at charts, asked to read passages. So it's essentially about the same, except timing is a little different for the ACT. There's also the optional writing section that I took. It's not necessary. It doesn't do much in the context of admissions offices, but if you want to take it and you're going to get a good score, more power to you. Let's see. Yeah, so the main 4 ACT test sections will individually be scored differently than the SAT. So the SAT, you might know how like the best perfectest score is a 1600 or a 1600. If you get anything above the 1500 range, that's also like as good as it gets. You're going to get into all the competitive colleges, or at least have a really good shot at them. The ACT, the max score is a 36. So generally you want to get above a 32 and you're great, you're set. So 35, 34. If you want to retake it after getting like a 32, I wouldn't recommend it. Obviously, if anything helps as an international student, but if you like stay at a 32 or you only get like a 33 the next time, focus your effort on other stuff. So testing, it's like a range of what is considered competitive. After a certain point, you're good, you're done. So here's some more information about the pricing. You can screenshot this if you want to. Their website is theact.org, and that should have more in-depth information, but I took this directly from the website. The full ACT with, no writing, generally what you should expect to pay is $63. The full ACT with the writing section is $88. Personally, it's definitely not worth paying that extra like $25 for writing. You can stick with the 63. And then if you want to change it, or if there's any, last minute thing that unfortunately causes you to cancel, the fee is $25. So about similarly priced as the SAT, but just so you can consider your options. So I've mentioned a few differences, but we're gonna get more in depth as to what makes these things different. So the SAT and the ACT, I mentioned, the sections work a little bit differently. The ACT being the exception of only having the science section. The ACT is 2 hours and 55 minutes, which is about 5 minutes shorter than the SAT on its own. Now the writing sections, you do get more writing time on the SAT. Generally, you get a lot more time on the SAT on both sections, as you can see. And we have less questions on the SAT as well. So you have a lot more time in the SAT, which is why I think most people take it. They're a lot more comfortable with it. They don't feel like they have to, time everything as quickly as the ACT, because I know I definitely had to pace myself pretty intensively. So this is an estimated minute and 10 seconds per question for the SAT. And if you do the math for the ACT, that's 49 seconds per question. Generally, it seems like the SAT is the much better option here. And we have a calculator, no calculator math section. I also believe the SAT does provide some formulas for you to work with. I know the ACT doesn't really do that. And the math section in its entirety is just, you can use calculators for the ACT. And then I mentioned the score ranges, so there's no need to repeat that. Generally, I've never seen anyone get a 1 on the ACT. Generally, you'll see people get 20 plus, so that should be a good sign that you guys will be okay. Just like the ACT is curved on what's called a curve, so which is why the lowest score is a 400 as opposed to just a 0 or a 1. Just some things to consider. And yeah. Oh, so reading the chat is okay. So for recordings, you guys should expect to see these on our YouTube, social media. So if you have to leave at any point, just be sure to check the recordings on our YouTube and you guys will be able to see it. So that's Education USA, Mexico City. And yeah, I hope that answers your guys' questions. Now the structure part. So I broke down the time barriers like a little more lucratively. So this is taking into account the breaks. So I took the ACT, I took breaks after every section. Generally, the break is not intensive, like a break, like 5-minute break while they're arranging papers and stuff. So nothing like great. Unless you take the essay section for the ACT, then you will have like about 10 minutes before the essay, which is a little better. The SAT, the breaks are similar, but you have a lot less breaks because the sections aren't as intense. You have 10 minutes after reading, and then you take writing and language and math before your next break. And generally, that's kind of expected. I definitely recommend you bring like a banana or like some sort of snack in between these breaks, or water. Make sure you go to the restroom. If you do get water, though, don't drink too much. Kind of, be cautious about it, because speaking from personal experience, when I'm drinking a lot of water while taking a test, I had to go in the middle of one of my sections. So just a warning for you guys, personal veteran advice. And yeah, so what do these tests actually look like? Well, this is an example from the SAT, and this is the reading portion. Generally, you should expect similar questions on the ACT as well for reading. I don't think there's many differences between the reading portions, aside from content. So if we look at the question 29, this is an example of a scientific reading. So it's actually kind of similar to the ACT, because the ACT has the science section. It's pretty much the same thing, except the SAT lumps those questions together in one section for reading. But aside from science, I mean, the SAT will have sections from nonfiction to fiction to science. Well, science is nonfiction. You know what I mean. And then the 31 question is the same thing. It's just a follow-up question from the passage, and you should generally expect to answer multiple questions for the same passage. We'll get into some tips on how to write or read through those passages, what you should write down as notes, and what to kind of look for. But for now, so the math section, I think the math section has like the most overlap. But from personal experience, I think the SAT is a lot more sneaky for no reason as to the questions they pose. The ACT is very like straightforward. So if you like that, if you don't like, people trying to play games with you, you might prefer the ACT. But if you like the timing, if you like the pacing, SAT should be good for you as well. This is just like a general question that you might expect. There's geometry, there's algebra, there's no calculus, so you're gonna be okay. Generally, there are word problems, but a lot of these you can use a calculator, and I believe the SAT does have a formula sheet, so you should be fine. So let's say if you don't remember what the equation for the radius is, oh no, shoot, let me check my formula sheet. Boom, boom, boom. You put it on, show your work. I should also note you don't have to show your work for these tests. There's a lot of testing strategies, which I will go into, but it's always good to make sure you understand it at least, so you're not going about the problem with the wrong sort of reasoning. So that's an example. You can look at millions of practice tests online. I also started a study group that you guys can definitely join once we start getting into the individual sections for the SAT, and I can help you guys with finding resources on how to practice these things. So the most important part is knowing how to prepare, because you've showed up, you've done the work, you've made sure you registered and everything's taken care of, but you have to actually prepare for it. And I imagine a lot of you don't have the leeway or financial security to just, take the SAT every single month, right? Not everyone's like that. I know I wasn't. So with COVID, it made it a lot more complicated because things kept getting canceled and it was really hard to take the test. So a lot of us either weren't able to take it, or the preparation we were able to do for it was very limited. So my personal advice, as well as the advice of people that I know that have taken it and done well in it, practice exams. If you're like me and you kind of suck at math, right? Or you're kind of not really good at tests, Practice exams, making sure you have a timer. Either you can use your phone or you can use, your alarm on your computer to make sure you're evenly trying to emulate the experience of the exam as best as you can. And then you're expected to do that continuously, weekly, daily. You don't have to do like an entire SAT in like one sitting. In fact, I don't recommend it, but I think you should at least try once, twice, 3 times, and a lot more if you feel like you're just not getting it. So each day, maybe try to do one section and do that timed. And then next day, try the other one. And then so on and so on until you basically build up how much experience you have in taking that specific exam. So let's say you get that down and you're like, okay, my practice exams get pretty good scores, but I get really scared or I get really anxious. That's definitely me. So what are some tips? So you guys have probably heard of manifestation. It's the idea of psyching yourself up to expect some sort of result that you want. So it's like, when I say manifest success, think to yourself, okay, I'm not here to stress about getting a score. I'm here because I know I can do it and I'm going to do my best. And I've already done everything I can to prepare. That is what manifest success means. And also self-care, make sure you're not going to bed at like 2 a.m. and not sleeping well. Make sure you're eating. Make sure you let your family know that, hey, I need to prioritize this right now. Let's see if we can make any lifestyle changes to better accommodate me for testing. So that's what we mean by practice self-care, eating well, sleeping well if you can. Obviously, it's not 100% perfect, and I'm not 100% perfect, but it definitely does help, especially if it's at least a few days before your test. If you can do that at least a few days before your test, put yourself in a good mental space. That will help tremendously. And I mentioned this a little bit in the last one, but focus less on getting a good score. Focus on doing your best because you're going to be stressed. You're going to be like, oh no, I got like a 26. I suck at this. But if you're focusing on doing your best, and let's say you get that 26, it's like, okay, so my best is at this level right now. What can I do to better myself individually? Maybe I need to practice more of this math, or maybe I need to learn something, or maybe I need to read in between the lines better. That's what I mean by less pressure on just getting a good score. It's the same principle with grades. It's the same principle with anything you do in life. I think this is actually advice I've had to learn from friends, is you should focus more on just doing your best, because if you're too hard on yourself, that's going to hurt you more. So what else? So sections advice from my personal experiences. All right. General advice that I have for you: time management. The reason why I recommend that you take your phone, your computer, set a clock for each section is so you know how much time you should expect between questions. You shouldn't be stuck on just one question and be like, oh no, I'm stuck, and then waste like 10 minutes on the same question. Do not do that. It's also recommended you take like an estimated guess, because that's generally a lot better than just I don't know, and then you skip it, or you don't even try answering it, because you're given the opportunity to answer the question. You should at least answer the question, if you don't get it wrong. Make sure you do come back to those questions. If you are moving between questions, make like a little dot or margin, or remind yourself. I know different testing centers have different standards for this. I think they also give you scratch paper. So, write on your scratch paper, like, okay, I don't get 36. Come back to it and make sure you stick to it. And then also gut feeling. I know it's like sometimes my gut is not right, but when it comes to testing, your gut is often pretty right. One of my problems when I was taking the exams was like, oh, well, I put this answer down, but I didn't feel really confident, so I changed it. And then guess what? I look at the answer key and it ended up being the problem or the question that I put initially. And I'm just like, so it's the same advice. If you feel like it's this certain answer, go for it. If your reasoning checks out, if the other ones don't make sense, do not back down. Because I could have gotten a lot more right if I just like trusted myself and I had confidence. And that's a big thing about testing too. Test confidence. So reading. This is applicable to the SAT. So generally with reading and the passages, you're going to have like different sections. You're going to have like a fantasy section where the passage is about some sort of fiction, science. You're going to have a narrative. So this could be like a real account of someone's experiences, or it could be fiction. Narrative generally is someone talking about either family or like some story-based test. So those are the types of passages you should expect, give or take. There's also like scientific fiction, which falls into science. And generally, you have 52 questions on the SAT and 40 questions on the ACT. I recommend skimming, but not in the way where it's like you overlook key details. I think my best strategy for reading is you take notes in the margin, highlight important aspects, and make sure you understand the story, because you do not want to reread the passage. You want to identify key moments in each passage and be like, okay, they talked about this, they talked about this, and they talked about this. So when you go back to the questions, I know a lot of people say you should read the questions first. Sometimes this works for people, sometimes it doesn't. Whichever you found works better for you, and you end up at the questions, you'll know what to identify when going back to the passage, because you'll have your notes, you'll kind of, summarize the passage and kind of dissected it, and you won't have to reread. You'll just need to know exactly where to look and boom, confirm. With writing in English, now if you're like me, I am not very good with grammar. I use Grammarly on a consistent basis when I'm writing. That's okay, because that's what technology is for. But especially if English is not your first language, this is a very difficult section, especially if you don't understand like semicolons or colons or really any of the grammar rules, because English is like really complicated for no reason. That's okay. The ACT has like 75 questions, but it's a little different. You saw in like the ACT questions that they're more wordy. The ACT is just, you're reading a passage and you're expected to put in words that fit in the passage, or synonyms that fit with the passage, or just like what grammar rule applies here, sort of examples. So for these sections, I think it's really helpful to understand the difference between main ideas and supporting details, because they're going to ask you, what's the main idea of the passage? They do this for reading too. If you don't know the main idea, they're going to throw a bunch of like random ideas into the answers. And you might be inclined to pick one just because it mentioned it in the passage, but you have to look at the concise, and you have to look at the way the answer is worded to make sure it's clear, concise, and there's no additional details. That is my advice. And generally you want to answer paragraph by paragraph, so make sure you have your questions laid out beside you, right? Let's say these are my questions, and then you have your passage here. You make note of the questions before you go through the entire passage, because if you go through the entire passage, you don't really need to. You just need to get like the sentences before or after to get the context of the conversation. Then you can fill in your questions like, oh, the word that should be here is Slade. Boom. Next question. Math. About evenly numbered between sections. I think this is like the most standard section between both tests. Plug and chug is referring to a strategy where, let's say you have a formula, okay? You have, let's see, x plus 2 equals 5. Very general, but I guarantee you'll have the same type of problems where you'll have like a variable, or you'll be forced to use some sort of substitution method. And then you have everything, you have all the answers lined up on the question, But let's say you don't know how to, solve for X. You have the answers. It has to be one of those 4 answers, and you have an X. What do? You replace the X with each of the answers until you have the value that makes +2 equal 5. So, big brain moment. This is not going to help you through every single problem because math does have some variety, and there's also geometry, so you will need to identify certain, figures, but it's very helpful. It does take a little bit of time, so do be mindful. But it's also very helpful that you draw pictures or you write out your work if you're kind of like me and you're a slow thinker. Like, I can't envision this in the question. Let me just draw it out really quickly. Oh, excuse me. That is really helpful. So that's another advice I would give to you. The essay portion is probably the portion I'm really good at, like the best one, confidently. But that's not like something too brag-worthy because you don't need to do the essay for these. But if you do, it's cool. Essay is pretty straightforward. Read the prompt. Underline the parts that the prompt is asking you to write about. Also, if there's like a passage or some sort of thing that like accommodates the essay section, make sure you take those notes, write them in the margin, and you want to plan it out a little bit. So let's say the prompt is a eulogy. A eulogy is a speech that someone gives at the funeral of another. So if you're expected to write about the eulogy and you're expected to write about the ways this speech is made to invoke a certain emotion in people, make sure you highlight that. Make sure you understand that it's like, okay, I'm looking for elements in this speech that demonstrate an emotional connection or emotional response, right? We're getting there. And then you want to write as much as you can, and when you can, really up your vocabulary. In my opinion, the essay portion is not a very good example of showing you what good writing is, because you're not going to write normally like the essay, but you want to make sure you use big vocabulary and you want to make sure you write a lot, because if you write a lot, it looks really good because it means you have a lot to say. Sometimes it won't be the most precise, which is the problem I have with the essay section, but write as much as you can because that is the way the people who grade your test are going to look at it and be like, oh, okay, she has a lot to say. She has a lot of complex analysis. Okay, higher score. Or, oh, she used a really big word, discombobulate. Okay, in that context, boom. And obviously, you want to use big words when they're not like completely out of context. So you don't want to say discombobulate and you're talking about something else completely different. So it's a balance, but if you have those words, it's really, really helpful for your score from what I've seen. Lastly, the science section, which is only for the ACT. It's 40 questions. And then with science, it's more so a grade on your analysis skills. Read the questions first and then go back to the figures, because you're going to have a lot of graphs and a lot of charts and like short passages. And you're going to be like, okay, I remember seeing this. The question's asking for how many freshwater fish developed fins at this season. You're going to go to the chart, boom, answer it quickly. If you're skimming through the stuff beforehand, you might get extra information that's meant to throw you off. But if you go to the questions first, you'll understand the figure and be like, okay, it's asking for this. Let me go back. Boom, I found it. Next question. It's a lot faster and a lot more concise. So you're not getting confused by like all the numbers, and they're going to be bringing up stuff you might not even fully understand. But as long as you read and you pay attention and you practice getting better at that, because no one's naturally good at science analysis, it'll be very helpful. So that's a lot of advice. If you guys want to take a picture of this, or you can always attend the session or watch the recording. Yeah, perfect. You can always go back to these. So let's say you've done all you could to practice. What are some of the non-test related things you can do to help yourself? I call it self-care. And every time I do have a big test, I do all these things. The day before the exam, do not cram. At that point, you need to relax, be content. At most, skim through your reviews, make sure it's a little refreshed in your mind, and then go to bed, okay? I don't want you staying up till 5 a.m. studying last minute because you're not going to remember it. Make sure you rest so you're not tired during the exam, because you will be tired. Make sure you have like a section in your house or whatever dedicated to the testing materials that you're going to need to bring. This can include pencils. This can include the ID if your testing center checks it. Yeah, I mean, you don't really need to bring too many. Calculator as well for math section, because they may not have spare calculators. So make sure you prepare those. And then the exam day, you want to eat a good breakfast, okay? Make sure your family knows. Maybe you don't generally eat breakfast, right? Or you don't eat much at all. Make it an effort to at least try, and let your family know so they can help you. Make sure you bring a snack, and that is generally the self-care aspect. It's not too difficult. It's generally stuff that you can plan for well in advance. But generally, yeah, you'll feel a lot better for the exam if you do all these things. So here's a cute conversion chart. It seems like a lot of numbers, but I will walk them through with you. So I mentioned how the SAT has a curve. This curve is bisection, and you'll see why. So in the first column, the raw score, that is the amount of questions you get correct. So let's say per section, you have the math section and you get 25 correct. How does this convert to the SAT? Well, for the SAT, you will be given a score of 490 if you get a 25. The reading score, let's say you get 21 right. Then your rating test score converts to 23. This is taking into account curves, right? Because curves, I'm not too sure on how they curve, but it's assuming that you get like an in-between number of answers correct. And then the same for the writing and language test score. Let's say you got 28 total questions correct. Then that would translate to a 28 score, and you're given different scores. So likewise, if you have like, let's say you get 100% on the math section and you get a 58, you have an 800 total score, which is the best possible score you could get. Woohoo, good job. And likewise, you can screenshot this if you want to know. Personally, it's not too important because they will calculate your score for you. But just so you have an understanding that there is a curve generally meant to help you if you miss one or two. So you could still get a perfect score. And then likewise, this is just another chart kind of explaining the math behind it. You don't need to know the math. Generally, it's very complicated. But if you wanted to know how to calculate it, this can also be found on the College Board website. This is for the SAT, by the way. So. And likewise, so I believe this is for the ACT. And it's a similar structure where you'll have the raw score of how many problems you get right, and then what it transfers to. So you can screenshot this as well, not too important, but generally, for example, a 36 is the most perfect score you can get on the ACT. This means you've gotten 75 questions correct on the English section, my bad. For 36 in the math section, you can miss one and still get a 36 in math. But, as you get more down, it's a lot less lenient. Let's say you get a 35 just because you missed one problem in the English section. Yeah, that's not the best feeling, but it's still a very insane score. So don't feel too bad about it. All right, I actually didn't do an exit poll. So actually, instead of an exit poll, we're going to do a Q&A section. So ignore that part. But if you have any questions, whether about my own experiences or what to expect in next webinars, feel free to unmute. You don't have to raise your hand, just unmute. You can also put them in the chat. Just how can I help you? Okay, so in the chat, we have, I would like to know, what can we do if we have a bad score? Okay, so when I first took the test, I did not have a good score at all. And that's okay, because the test isn't designed to have everyone do well in it. It definitely has a lot of historical barriers for people. But generally, if you have a bad score, just know that you can always take it again, especially if you take it like in your junior year. You can take it like before anytime your senior year. So I definitely recommend that you should reconsider your practice resources and look to take the test again. If you can't, it happens. But generally, when you get a bad score, don't feel bad. You can always take it again. Yes, it'll cost money. Generally, you should communicate with your family or people you know to try to support the resources you need to take it again. But it's not something that you're set for life. Like if you do bad, you're screwed. You can always take it again. Next question. How important is it to take them now that many schools are going test blind or test optional? Okay, so I'm a perfect example of this. UChicago has always taken test optional. Why? I think UChicago is admissions processes prioritize like actual intelligence and immersion. But the people who they do take in with test scores, they have very high test scores. But if you don't have test scores, they're a lot more lenient in showing unique ways of intelligence. So that's one thing to consider. A lot of people I know did not take the test, or they didn't turn in their bad scores because of COVID. I was one of them. But I think now it's a little more complicated because some schools are going back to taking tests, others aren't. But that just means you should focus on your extracurriculars, your grades, and definitely your essays, which are still viewed importantly. But if you get a really good score, like report it, like send it to the colleges without a doubt. I am not too familiar with how they view admissions differently based on test scores, but generally it's assumed that you compensate in a lot of ways in other aspects of your application. So that's generally what you should expect. Next, is there a recommended book to help us study? Yeah, I know the library, library that I'm currently working at, we have a lot of resource books. I've heard people take Princeton Review. I've heard people take Kaplan. Thank you for coming, Hector. Let's see. There's a lot of different books, but personally, my favorite resource is Khan Academy because I think it's a lot more reflective of the score you're going to get in the actual exam, but it's also online and it's free. So I'm going to actually put them in the chat for you of like the different, I'm going to put Khan Academy because it's free and it's online.
Yeah, I will also add, as Daniel mentioned, the Benjamin Franklin Library has many resources. You just need to get a free membership in order to get those. Right now, the library remains closed, but if you want to check out materials, you can schedule an appointment. If you're interested in scheduling an appointment only to check out books, write us an email and we can send you the details so you can make an appointment at the library and you can check out the materials. We have many books that will help you to study for SAT or ACT, even for writing your essays, for doing your school research, TOEFL, IELTS, etc. So if you're interested, write us an email at mexicocity@educationusa.org so we can share with you the details on how to check out the materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanni. Additionally, someone asks, do you recommend seniors to take the SAT in August? Yes, I think you still have plenty of time in the summer before your senior year. This is before you're applying to colleges, I'm assuming, to take the SAT. So absolutely. I know a lot of people took it over the summer, especially with COVID. I was expected to take it in the summer, but COVID kept, messing that up. So absolutely. Next question.
Sorry, and for that, I would like to add for the person who asked about taking the test during August. So SAT and ACT, they make specific dates where you can take the tests. These tests are subject to change due to the pandemic. I mean, last year, all of the SATs dates got canceled because of the pandemic. This year, I mean, for the rest of the year, we don't know what's going to happen. But if you are even thinking about applying early action or early decision, those dates are usually early November. So November 1st, November 2nd. So if you're planning to apply early, then we highly recommend you taking the SAT or ACT in August. That way you have enough time to get your scores and enough time that you can submit your scores for early applications. For SAT, there's another test date in October, but I think that won't give you enough time or will be in a very short window of time for you to receive your scores and then to submit your scores to the universities. So they are on time before the deadlines. So we recommend you to prepare and take the test for the August test date. That's it.
I was really thinking to take the SAT in August. I was just studying for this whole year because I'm in a gap year. So I was really thinking if it will be like recommended because I will apply early. So thank you very much. I will do it. Thank you, Daniel and Yandy.
Well, thank you. That's a good question. Thank you, Yandy. Someone asks, where can we find practice tests? There's a lot of practice tests online. If you just look up like ACT practice tests, there's a lot of websites that just have databases of just like a bunch of past exams. Generally, I found these just by Googling the practice tests, or some like Khan Academy have SAT practice tests that you can do through their website. So
yes, something really quick to add. If you go to the SAT's website that it's administered by the College Board, so if you go to collegeboard.org, they have, I think, a couple of free practice tests. And I will also share with everyone our blog on the chat. Our blog is a great resource for you to look for these resources to study. And our blog also have different websites, as Daniel mentioned, that you can take practice tests, not only for SAT or ACT, but also for TOEFL or the IELTS, etc. So I will share with you that resource on the chat.
Thank you, Yanni. Did anyone else have any other questions they wanted to ask, or if they wanted me to go over anything else. Go ahead.
Okay, I just have one question. Through this session, we will study only reading and writing and also maths, because I was participating in other and it was only for reading. So I was really interested in study both. So
Yeah. So each week we will have this session at the same time. So yes, every week we'll be going over a different section at this time. So if you can make it at 4 p.m., perfect, because next week I believe we're doing reading, then we're doing writing and language, and then math, both types for the SAT. So yes, we will be covering every single section for every single part of the exam except the essay. So yes.
okay, I just have another question, just the last question. Do you recommend buy a new calculator or just ask for a friend for a calculator?
So any calculator is fine. The website for College Board or ACT should specify which kind of calculator you should use. First, you do not need to buy a calculator. You don't need your own like personal calculator. Yes, you can absolutely ask a friend. I know I have for many things outside of testing because I cannot afford a calculator. So that is okay. You just have to make sure the calculator fits the requirements put on the website for what's acceptable. Because if you can access the internet and stuff like that on your calculator, then it's no good. But generally, if you have like, a regular old calculator, it should be perfect. So make sure you check those requirements online. And yeah, it doesn't have to be your own calculator. You can just borrow a friend's for that day and then, but you have to have your own. So you can't switch between calculators between people in the testing center. You have to bring that calculator from your friend, borrow it, and then once you're done, give it back to your friend, and then it's all good. But you can't transfer or share calculators while taking the test. So I hope that helps.
Oh, okay. If I'm like studying for that section for, can I use my phone calculator or I need to use the calculator to have like practice?
Right. So you will need the regular calculator. You can't bring your phones or anything that has access to the internet to a testing center. So no phones, no watches. They're very stingy on watches now because everyone can go online on them. And yeah, so make sure it's not your phone, just a regular calculator, like a scientific one or a graphing or whatever.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. A great question. Yandy is putting some links in the chat if you want more information on the upcoming events. I will be at every single one, woohoo, and I will be with you guys this summer to help you with SAT, conversation club stuff, Common App, essays. So you guys are going to be stuck with me for a while, but for the next session, we're going to start with reading, I believe, and you guys will actually have the opportunity to join our WhatsApp study group. So the study group, it'll be me, my other intern, who unfortunately won't be joining us for some time, but he will be in the chat. Yandi will also be there. Basically, we'll be here just to help you if you have questions and to help you with any practice problems you might not know how to do, or really anything to help you guys with. So look forward to that. Make sure you guys come next week. Does anyone have any last questions?
So we will be sharing with them the link to join the WhatsApp group through email, or are you gonna share that here on the chat?
I could probably do that now, honestly. Okay, hold on. One
Yeah,
second.
and we will also share with you guys on email just to get the people who left earlier so they can also join. And remember, this group, we will only keep it to share SAT and ACT stuff, questions, problems, resources, etc. So while Danielle does that, make sure also to join Danielle next Thursday on an Instagram takeover. She will be taking our Education USA's Mexico City Instagram account, and she will be sharing with you a little bit more about her own experience as a student at U Chicago. So you can ask her any questions that you may have regarding her undergraduate experience, the U Chicago campus, or student life, the American culture. So make sure to follow us on Instagram. You can find us at Education USA, Mexico City. If you are not following us, make sure to follow us so you can be aware of our next activities.
Thank you, Yendi. Yeah, you guys have a lot of stuff to look forward to this summer. I'm really excited to meet all of you and of course talk to you more as we go through SAT, preparing for college, all that stuff. So I'm here for you every step of the way. Probably just as a last measure from the presentation, do you guys want to take the SAT more or the ACT? Just put it in the chat, which one you think you like more. Personally, I probably would have taken the SAT as opposed to the ACT if I didn't have a choice. But other than that, yeah, make sure you guys join the study group. We won't do anything yet since it's just an introduction, but next week when we do SAT prep at this time again, make sure you guys, join our study group. I'll put it again in that session and we can start this summer on a productive note. If no one else has any other questions, you guys are free to leave. Thank you all so much for staying. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Make sure to join our conversation class or check out our other events. And yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks a lot.